watching.
Hello, dear. Welcome back to Feartells. Tonight's story is not just disturbing, it's real. And what you're about to hear happened inside an old wooden farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia. A house that was supposed to be a fresh start for a young couple who'd just gotten married. A house they got for a price that was way too good to be true. And by the time they figured out why it was so cheap, it was already too late for one of them. This is the story of the Hinton House and what happened to Daniel and Rebecca Vance in the spring of 2004. So go ahead, dim your lights, put your headphones on, and stay close, because some houses aren't really houses, they're traps. This actually happened. Now I want to set the scene for you because this house mattered. The location mattered. The wood it was built out of mattered. The Hinton House sat at the end of a long dirt road about 15 miles outside the town of Hinton, West Virginia, up in the Appalachian foothills, surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides and a slow, dark river on the 4th. It was a 2-story wooden farmhouse built in 1887, painted white at some point in its history, but mostly faded down to the bare gray wood by the time the Vances bought it, with a wraparound porch, green shutters, a steep tin roof, and a stone chimney running up the side that hadn't seen smoke in decades. The house was beautiful in a way, in that sad, abandoned way that old American houses get when nobody's loved them for a long time. And it was cheap. $48,000 for a 4-bedroom farmhouse on 12 acres of land, with a barn and a creek and a view of the mountains that would take your breath away in the morning. Daniel Vance was 26 years old. He worked as a mechanic. He'd grown up in West Virginia, and he'd always wanted to own land. Rebecca was 25. She was a nurse at the hospital in Beckley. They'd been married for about a year. They wanted to start a family. They wanted a place with a yard. They wanted out of their tiny apartment in town. When their realtor showed them the listing for the Hinton House, they thought it was a typo. They thought it had to be a mistake. Houses like that, with that much land, didn't go for that kind of money. But it wasn't a typo. The realtor told them the house had been on the market for almost 6 years, that it had been bought and sold 3 times in the last 15 years, and that the previous owners had all left for various reasons. Nothing serious, she said, just that the house was remote, and the road got bad in the winter, and people who weren't used to country living had a hard time out there. That's what she said. What she didn't say was that the previous 3 owners had all moved out within a year of buying the house, that 2 of them had broken their leases and walked away from their down payments to leave faster, and that one of them had checked into a psychiatric hospital in Charleston and was still there 6 years later. The realtor didn't say any of that, and Daniel and Rebecca didn't ask. They saw the house on a beautiful Saturday in March of 2004. The sun was shining, the trees were just starting to bud, the river was sparkling, and the house looked like something out of a magazine. They put in an offer that same afternoon. They closed 3 weeks later, and they moved in on April 4th, 2004. At first, it didn't seem unusual. The first week was wonderful. They unpacked their boxes. They painted the kitchen. They hung pictures on the walls. They cooked their first dinner in the new house and ate it on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, with a bottle of cheap wine and the kind of happiness that young couples have when they think they've just figured out their whole lives. Daniel said in his interview years later that those first few days were the happiest of his marriage, and maybe that's why what happened next hit him so hard. On their 5th night in the house, Rebecca woke him up at around 2 a.m. She was sitting up in bed, and she was staring at the bedroom door. Daniel asked her what was wrong, and she didn't answer at first. She just kept staring. And then she said, very quietly, "There's somebody in the hallway."
He couldn't hear anything. He told her she was probably just dreaming, that the house made weird noises because it was old, that the wind was making the wood settle, and he told her to go back to sleep. She did eventually, but about an hour later, Daniel woke up because he heard it too. A footstep in the hallway. A single, slow, deliberate footstep on the old wooden floor right outside the bedroom door. And then another one, and another one, walking past the bedroom door toward the stairs. Daniel sat up. He reached for the gun he'd kept in the nightstand, a little .38 revolver his father had given him, and he got out of bed as quietly as he could. Rebecca was awake by then too. She was watching him, terrified, and she whispered, "Don't go out there. Please don't go out there." Daniel said he had to. He told her to lock the bedroom door behind him. He told her to call 911 if she heard anything bad. He opened the bedroom door, and the hallway was empty. He turned on the hallway light. He checked the other bedrooms upstairs, all empty. He went downstairs. He checked the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, the basement door, all locked, all empty. The front door was locked from the inside. The back door was locked from the inside. Every window was closed and locked. Nobody was in the house. But the footsteps had been there. He had heard them, clearly, for at least 10 or 15 seconds. He went back upstairs. He got back in bed. He told Rebecca it was nothing, probably just the house settling, and they both lay there, in the dark, not sleeping, until the sun came up. That was their 5th night, and from that night forward, the house didn't stop. The next few weeks were a slow, steady descent into something that neither of them had any frame of reference for. The footsteps came back almost every night, always around 2 or 3 a.m., always walking the same path, from somewhere in the back of the house, down the upstairs hallway, past their bedroom door, and to the top of the stairs, and then they would just stop. Sometimes there would be one set of footsteps, sometimes 2. Once, Rebecca counted 3 different sets of footsteps walking past their door at the same time, overlapping. One heavy and slow, one quick and light like a child, and one that dragged like a person with a limp. They didn't sleep well. They started fighting. Daniel started drinking more than he should. Rebecca started having migraines and missing shifts at the hospital. They both started losing weight, and the house started to feel different. It's hard to explain, Daniel said in his interview, but the air in the house felt heavier. Every room felt colder than the room next to it. The wood floors started creaking even when nobody was walking on them. The doors wouldn't stay closed properly anymore. They'd shut a door, latch it, and walk away, and a few minutes later they'd come back and the door would be open again. And there was a smell, a faint smell that came and went that they couldn't track to any source. They'd notice it in a particular room, and they'd search the whole room top to bottom, and they'd find nothing. Daniel said it smelled like dirty water, like the inside of an old well, mixed with something organic. Rebecca said it smelled like funeral flowers, the way a funeral home smells when the flowers have been there too long. They started searching the house, really searching it, going through every closet, every cabinet, every corner of the basement and attic, looking for something, anything that could explain what was happening. They found things. In the attic, behind a panel of loose wood, they found a small wooden box tied shut with old, dry, rotted twine. And inside the box, they found a stack of photographs, black and white photographs, very old, of a family, a mother, father, and 3 children, all standing in front of the same house they were now living in. But the photographs were strange. In every single photograph, the family's faces had been scratched out with something sharp, like a needle or a pin. Every face, every photograph, scratched into nothing. On the back of one of the photographs, written in pencil, in handwriting that looked like a child, were the words,
"They came in through the wood." That was it, they came in through the wood. Daniel and Rebecca didn't know what that meant. They put the box back where they found it, in the basement in a corner that had been hidden behind some old shelving. Daniel found something carved into the wood of one of the support beams. It was a sentence carved deep into the wood by someone who had clearly spent a lot of time on it. It said, "Don't sleep upstairs. Don't sleep upstairs. Don't sleep upstairs." 3 times. Daniel showed it to Rebecca. Rebecca wanted to leave the house that night. Daniel talked her out of it. He said they couldn't just walk away from a house they had bought. They had a mortgage. They had nowhere else to go. He said they needed to give it more time. He said maybe the previous owner had been crazy, and that's why all the weird stuff was there. Rebecca didn't argue. But that night, she made Daniel sleep downstairs with her, on the couch in the living room. And nothing happened. The footsteps came that night like they always did, but they stayed upstairs. They walked back and forth in the upstairs hallway for what Daniel said was almost an hour, and then they stopped. They slept on the couch every night for the next week, and the footsteps stayed upstairs. For a while, they thought they had figured it out. They thought maybe whatever was happening in the house was confined to the second floor, and as long as they slept downstairs, they would be fine. But then, the footsteps started coming downstairs. The first time it happened, Daniel and Rebecca were both asleep on the couch, and Rebecca woke up because something was sitting on her feet. Not a person, something heavier than a person, pressing down on her ankles, so heavy she couldn't move them at all. She opened her eyes, and the living room was completely dark except for the faint light from the nightlight they had started leaving on. And in the doorway of the living room, standing perfectly still, was the silhouette of a man. Tall, very tall, taller than the doorway, so his head was hidden up in the shadow of the upper part of the doorframe. She couldn't see his face, she couldn't see his hands, but she could see his outline. And she could see that he was breathing because his shoulders were rising and falling slowly, deliberately. He was watching them sleep. Rebecca tried to scream, but she couldn't. She tried to wake up Daniel, but she couldn't move anything except her eyes. She lay there for what she said felt like an hour, frozen, watching the figure in the doorway watch her back. And then, very slowly, the figure stepped into the living room, and as he stepped forward into the dim light from the nightlight, she saw him a little more clearly. He wasn't a man. Not exactly. He had the shape of a man, but his proportions were wrong. His arms were too long, hanging down past his knees. His head was too small for his shoulders, and his skin, or what she could see of his skin, looked like wood. Old, dark, weathered wood. Like he wasn't a person. He was a carving of a person that decided to walk. He took one slow step toward the couch, and then another, and then Daniel woke up. He woke up because Rebecca's hand had finally moved, and she had grabbed his arm, and she was squeezing it so hard her nickel eyes were drawing blood. Daniel sat up, he looked at her, he looked at where she was looking, and the figure was gone. The doorway was empty. The pressure on Rebecca's feet was gone. She could move again. She started crying, and she couldn't stop. They left the house that night.
They drove into town in the middle of the night in their pajamas, and they checked into a motel, and they slept for 16 hours straight, the deepest sleep either of them had had in weeks. The next morning, they sat in the motel diner, and they had a long conversation. Rebecca wanted to sell the house immediately, that day, for whatever they could get and never go back. Daniel agreed. They drove back to the house that afternoon, in the daytime, in the bright spring sunshine, when the house looked beautiful and harmless and like nothing bad could ever happen there. And they started packing. They figured they'd pack what they could fit in their 2 cars, they'd drive it all to Daniel's parents' house an hour away, and they'd come back later for anything else. They'd call the realtor in the morning. They packed for a few hours, and around 5 p.m., Rebecca went upstairs to grab some clothes from the bedroom closet while Daniel finished loading boxes into the car. She was upstairs for a long time, maybe 20 minutes. Daniel came inside, looking for her, calling her name. She didn't answer. He went upstairs. The bedroom door was closed. He opened it. Rebecca was standing in the middle of the bedroom, facing the closet, not moving. Daniel said her name. She didn't answer. He walked up to her, he put his hand on her shoulder, and he turned her around to face him.
and he said in his interview that the woman who turned around to face him was not his wife. It looked like Rebecca, exactly like her, same face, same hair, same clothes, but her eyes were wrong. They were dull, empty, like someone had turned a light off behind them. And she smiled at him, and she said, "I want to stay." Daniel asked her what she meant. She just kept smiling, and she said it again. "I want to stay. I want to stay. I want to stay." Daniel said he grabbed her by the wrist and he pulled her out of that bedroom and he dragged her down the stairs and out the front door, and he physically put her in the passenger seat of his car, and he drove away from that house as fast as he could without taking another box, without locking the door, without looking back. Rebecca didn't fight him. She didn't speak the whole way to his parents' house. She just sat in the passenger seat, smiling softly, looking out the window. When they got to his parents' house, she finally seemed to come out of it. She got out of the car. She looked confused. She didn't remember the last hour. She didn't remember packing or going upstairs or any of it. The last thing she remembered was eating breakfast at the diner. She was scared, really scared. She kept asking Daniel what had happened, and Daniel didn't know how to tell her what he had seen. That night, at his parents' house, they slept in his old childhood bedroom, and for the first time in weeks, they slept peacefully. And the next morning, everything was fine. Rebecca seemed like herself again. She was sweet, she was funny, she was relieved to be away from the house. They ate breakfast with Daniel's parents, they talked about their plans, they decided they would go back to the house in a few days with Daniel's brother and a couple of friends, and they would clear it out completely, and they would put it on the market that week. Daniel let himself relax. For the first time in a month, he let himself believe that the worst was over. That night, Rebecca went to bed early, around 9 o'clock, saying she was exhausted from everything. Daniel stayed up, watching TV with his dad, until about 11. And when he went upstairs and opened the bedroom door, Rebecca was gone. The window was open. Her shoes were missing from the floor. Her car keys were missing from the dresser. Daniel ran downstairs. He checked the driveway. Her car was gone. He called her cell phone.
It rang in the bedroom upstairs, on the nightstand, where she had left it. Daniel called the police. The police put out a missing persons report. They checked the local hospitals, the bus stations, the credit card activity. Nothing. Rebecca had just disappeared in the middle of the night, without taking her phone, without leaving a note, without telling anyone where she was going. And then, at 4 a.m., Daniel got a phone call from the West Virginia State Police. They had found Rebecca's car at the Hitton house, parked in the driveway with the keys still in the ignition and the driver's door open. Daniel drove out there immediately. The state police were waiting for him. 2 cruisers, 4 officers, lights flashing in the dark woods around the property. They told Daniel they had searched the house, every room, every closet, the basement, the attic, the barn, the surrounding woods. She wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere. But there was something they wanted him to see. They walked him into the house, up the stairs, down the hallway, and into the master bedroom. And in the middle of the bedroom floor, right where Rebecca had been standing the day before when she had told Daniel, "I want to stay," was a hole in the floorboards. A round hole about 3 feet across, cut neatly through the old wood with smooth edges like someone had measured it carefully before they cut it. The hole hadn't been there the day before. Daniel knew it hadn't because he had stood right on that spot when he turned Rebecca around to face him. The hole went down through the floor into the darkness below. And there was no basement underneath that part of the house. The basement only ran under half of the structure. The other half, including the master bedroom, was built directly on the dirt. The state police lowered a flashlight down into the hole. The hole went down 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet into the dirt below the house, with smooth, hand-dug walls, just like Carl Hennig's well, just like the hole at Unit H-114. The police searched the hole as best they could. They brought in a small camera on a long pole. They sent a state police diver down into it on a harness, and the diver came up after 15 minutes saying he couldn't find the bottom, that the hole kept going, that the air down there was bad, and that he wasn't going any farther without proper equipment.
They never sent anyone else down. They got equipment from a local rescue team. They tried again 3 days later, but by then the hole had collapsed in on itself. The dirt walls had given way, and what had been a 30-foot deep hand-dug shaft was now just a pile of loose dirt and old roots 4 or 5 feet deep, like nothing had ever been there at all. Rebecca was never found. Not in the hole, not in the woods, not anywhere. She just disappeared. Daniel stayed at his parents' house for the next 6 months. He didn't go back to the Hinton house. He hired someone to clear out the rest of his things and put it on the market. The house sold within a year for $38,000, $10,000 less than they had paid for it. He divorced Rebecca legally in absentia 3 years later when he had to in order to remarry, though he says he never really stopped looking for her. He moved out of West Virginia. He lives in Tennessee now. He doesn't talk about that year very often, but he gave one long interview in 2019 to a podcast about Appalachian disappearances, and that's where most of these details come from. At the end of that interview, he said something that I think about a lot. He said, "I know what people think happened. They think I killed her. They think I'm covering something up with his story about the house. The cops thought that for a while too. They investigated me hard, and they couldn't find anything because there was nothing to find. I didn't kill my wife. Something in that house took her. I don't know what it was. I don't know where it took her, but I know it's still there. Because every once in a while, even now, 15 years later, I'll get a phone call from a number I don't recognize. And when I answer, there's no voice on the other end, just breathing. And just once, about 5 years ago, I heard someone whisper my name, and it was her voice. It was Rebecca's voice. And she said, 'Danny, I want to stay.' And then she hung up." The Hinton House is still standing. It's been bought and sold 2 more times since the Vances owned it. The current owner is an older man, a widower, who lives there alone. He's been there about 6 years now, which is the longest anyone has lived in that house in over 30 years. Local people say he doesn't come into town much. They say he keeps to himself. They say when they see him at the gas station or the grocery store, he always looks tired, and he always has dirt under his fingernails, like he's been digging.